What's going on, guys, and welcome back. So today we're going to talk about deck building in Lorcana, something that seems so easy but yet can be so hard. I see so many people asking in Facebook groups and Discord servers how to improve my deck. What's wrong with this deck? Why can't I seem to get consistent hands? And today we're going to go ahead and talk about a handful of things I go through when deck building, and then we're going to click on some random trending decks and see how many of my steps these decks follow, just out of curiosity. But if you're interested in specific decks and building them, I'm in the middle of working on a handful of videos such as Amethyst Steel, Steel Song, among things like Emerald Amber, and a handful of others where I will commentate over a couple replays. Then we'll go through the deck, the choices, and why we're playing those cards, followed by 3 more replays where they're uncommentated. You can skip it if you want, or you can just watch the sped up replays for the gameplay footage. That's kind of the format we're going to run with and see how it goes. But anyway, so deck building. There are 6 colors, obviously, and you're going to have to pick 2 of them. You can play monotone colors. I just personally don't recommend it yet. The card pools are not good enough to where one color sustains itself competitively. You have Amber. This color is great with singers. It has some really strong shifts like the Queen. But your Cinderella and your Ariel being 1 and 3 cost, who can sing 3 and 5 songs respectively, is very strong. Ariel also being able to search the top of your deck and add a song to your hand potentially is very, very strong. In addition to that, it also has some pretty aggressive early cards, so you can be on the aggro side of your build. Amethyst. Amethyst obviously has the bounce control aspect, whether it's your Madam Mims or your Arthur. And on top of that, you have your Merlin cards. Who would have thought Merlin and Mim would work so good together, because they fought so much in the movie. But yeah, they work really well together, whether it's your rabbit or your goat, either getting you cards or getting you lore points. These cards work very well together, and if that's not enough, this deck also can be aggressive. So if you want to combine Amber and Amethyst into a hyper aggro build, you definitely can do that. Pinocchio being a 2-cost 3 quester, and Maleficent being a 1-cost 2 quester. Going a little bit further, cards like in the 3-cost range of Friends from the Other Side and Maleficent are very good cards for the draw engine, in addition to that Merlin Rabbit, how we had mentioned as well. It does have some heavy hitters on the back end of things with the Ursula and the Elsa, 7 and 8 costs respectively, and even the 6-cost Inkable Yzma as another strong card. Moving on into Emerald. This deck has a very strong evasive in Ray. It's a 5-cost that quests for 3, and like I said, it's evasive, so that makes it problematic for a lot of decks to deal with. In addition to that, you can try to set up things like your Bucky Little John combo and discard your opponent's hand and draw in the process, whether it's Sudden Chill, Hypnotize, or your Lucifer, to help trigger and discard their hand. You have your Sapphire build as well, which this deck specializes in ramping and building your Inkwell up very fast. It has things like Let It Go and Hades that are very good at removal. It has Cogsworth, who is very good to help give your whole board resist, and if you get out multiple, it gets to the point where your board is very hard to deal with. And yeah, you can get rid of your opponent's cards even through some of these effects, and it does go to their Inkwell, but again, it doesn't trigger effects when they leave the field, like to get banished, such as the goats or Mufasa, things like that. What other ones do we have? We did not say anything about Steel yet. Steel specializes in targeted damage and I guess untargeted too, because Grab Your Swords just deals 2 damage to everything. Tinkerbell does 1 damage to everything. Obviously, when she banishes a card, she can also deal 2 more damage. They have the smaller guy, I can't think of his name. It's not Robin. Yeah, it is Robin Hood. Exert him and do 1 damage to your opponent. In addition, they have cards that when they quest, they can deal damage to you as well. Steel really focuses on effect damage while also having some very strong cards in the shift category, such as Big Tink, Cinderella, and Hercules. As if all that's not enough, Beast is probably one of the best meta staples right now in any steel deck. The fact that he can make you draw 2 cards at the beginning of your turn if your opponent can't put damage on him is very, very oppressive. Finally, we have Ruby. Ruby being the deck that specializes in board wipe with Be Prepared. It has Lady Tremaine for targeted removal, albeit your opponent gets to target it. But if you can deal with their board, leave just 1 card on it, and then drop the Lady Tremaine, you can get rid of it that way. Maleficent, you get to choose. Dragonfire is another option that's less common, but you get to choose. Teeth and Ambition is another card where you can deal damage to your opponent that way. Maui coming in as a rush character and having 6 attack is pretty strong. He can deal with just about anything in one swing, and he cannot quest, so that's the small downside, but for a 5-cost card, Maui is very, very strong. So that's kind of a little bit about each color. So again, you'd have to pick 2 because monotone colors aren't going to work. And what I do first, I look for I'll find my bosses. What's my end goal plan? Am I playing Amber Amethyst and I want to win really, really early? Okay, what do I have for good cards like Stitch Rockstar? I can shift into it. Quest for 3, I can summon it on turn 4. In addition to that, you get out other cards earlier. You can also use Just in Time to get out things like your Eudora or your Goofy or your Maximus bodyguards. So by playing, you build it almost backwards. Find a few of your boss cards, your end goal, and then how are you going to get to it? If you're playing something like Ruby Amethyst, this one is one where, okay, so what are your power cards? Maleficent. Are you playing it? Most people are, because it's very good, especially with Sapphire Steel being a meta deck and decks or games going into the grind longer and you getting up there. You're probably going to want at least 2 copies of Maleficent. Do you play 2, 3, or 4? Or like I said, are you one of those who choose to play 0? In addition to that, Be Prepared. 3 or 4 of? Those are the 2 I'd kind of go with. Are you going to play all 4? Or do you want to run 3? And it's kind of a pick that you have to choose because you also have Lady Tremaine as a high cost uninkable card, just like Be Prepared. How many Lady Tremaine are you playing? I'm probably going to play 4 in my builds, 3 Be Prepareds, and then like 2 or 3 Maleficents, kind of judging how things go with that. Then in addition though, you can run things like Elsa and Ursula, which also again, uninkable high cost cards. So you have to be careful with how many you put in here. And this is why you kind of pick like a handful of your boss cards. And then after we get that, we're going to go find your key pieces, your staples. If you're playing Amethyst, this is going to include things like Madame Mim Fox and Merlin Goat, among other cards. If you're playing Steel Song, it's going to be like your Singers, your Cinderella, your Ariel, your Song cards, obviously, your Grab Your Swords, your Let the Storm Rage On, things like that. So find your staple cards for what you're playing as well and add those in. Once you got your boss cards and your key pieces, let's look at low cost. You got to be able to play something, whether it's your 1-cost cards. How many 1-cost cards should you play? Personally, I don't think you should play less than 8. I think lots of decks can play 8, and that's fine. You'll see one the vast majority of the time. And even if you mulligan 5, the top 12 cards of your deck, it's over a 90% chance to see one of those 8. So if you play 8, you have a very, very good chance to get into one of them on your first turn, which is obviously what you want. You want to try to have your first 3 turns set up in your hand before the game even starts. If you can do that, you're in a good spot already. If you cannot do that, you're going to be chasing your hand and also trying to stop your opponent. So now you're trying to do 2 things at once, whereas if you have your first few turns in your hand, you can kind of maneuver it to your opponent if you need to, but at least you know you have what you need for your deck to work how it's supposed to. Other low cost things, are you playing aggressive? Like I said, Maleficent in Amethyst, or are you playing things like Ruby Amethyst and you're playing like Olaf or Minnie Mouse? Are you playing your Cinderella or your 1-cost Queen in Amber decks because Queen can shift by turn 2 into the big Queen? Are you playing things like that? So 8 to I wouldn't play more than 12 though. 8 to 12 1-cost cards I think is the proper range that you should be in. And then when we go to our 2-cost cards, here I like to kind of be around 10-ish, 10 to 12. Still not too many, but a little bit more because usually they start to get a little bit better as you go on. There are decks sometimes where I play 9 or 8 even, but typically I'm right around 10 2-cost cards in my deck. 3 costs. Now our 3 costs. I think 3 to 5 is going to be like the bulk of your deck because it's your mid-range plays, it's your extending plays, it's some of your shift plays. It's really where the deck starts to do what it needs to do. So a lot of the time I feel like there's not a set number for your 3 costs, but it's going to most likely be the biggest cost curve in your deck is that 3 cost spot. And then you'll hit 4, which some decks, like especially Amethyst decks, sometimes I'm only playing Goat and Rabbit as my 4 cost cards. And then if I can't play anything the following turn, I'll just go back to low cost things or just build my Inkwell and play it that way. Once you start to get like your 5, 6, 7, 8 cost cards and higher, like 5 and higher, that whole category usually isn't going to be too big. 5 cost higher is 20 cards max, and there's exceptions to every rule. We'll see decks where they don't follow this, where it just isn't how it works, especially with Ruby decks. And that's not to say there's anything wrong with that, especially things like in Amber when you have a card like Just in Time that can play a 5 cost card for 3 costs basically. Or in things with Sapphire, because Sapphire can ramp up your Inkwell faster, so you're not waiting until turn 6, 7 to get to 7 ink. You're doing it by turn 4 or 5, and that makes a big difference when you're deck building that way too. So we get, like I said, 8 to 12 1-cost cards, roughly 10 2 costs. Our 3 costs is probably going to come in the higher, mid to higher teens. 4s, you're probably going to creep back down towards like that 6 to 12 range, somewhere in there. 5s, 6, 7s, 8 plus. Like, a lot of decks won't have 8 or 9 cost cards. That's just how it is. There's not, I feel like, a whole lot to say about that. A lot of decks with 7 cost cards, it'll be like 0 to 8. Same with 6 costs, like 0 to 8. Some decks don't have any. Other decks have 8. Like, it's kind of a variance. Especially too when you look at, is it inkable or is it not inkable? Which, speaking of that now, once we kind of got our drop curve figured out, I personally, 15 uninkable max. Sometimes I'll go over it because, again, exceptions to every rule, but ideally 10 to 15 is my uninkable area that I like to stick into. I've had decks actually come out with like 3 uninkable and that was it, and I was like, wow, interesting. But at the same time, a lot of cards, that's how they balance them, is by making them uninkable. So if you're not playing any uninkable cards, you're probably missing out on some really strong cards. We mentioned kind of establishing your play lines. Once you got your deck build down too, try to think it out. Like, okay, so turn 1, I want to play this card or this card, like Amber Amethyst. Turn 1, I either want to go for Stitch or Queen, ideally, because them are my shift targets. They're my play lines that play through Steel a lot stronger. Or if I need to, I can fail off and go to option 3, which is Maleficent. Downside to Maleficent is it loses to any type of damage on board. So that's not the ideal plan. But turn 2, if I go the Queen route, I want to shift up into Queen. If I go the Stitch route, it can depend. Did my opponent put a presence on board? Then do I put the bodyguard out in Simba? Or did they not? Now I can potentially go Maleficent or Maleficent Queen or Pinocchio and try to put more pressure and aggression on board. And then turn 3, when that Pinocchio is able to quest, I can drop the bodyguard exerted and know he's protected that way. Turn 4, Big Stitch can come in. Like I said, Queen. Turn 2, you can shift into her if you want. Sometimes I'll actually put a different card down and then put Queen down on turn 3, because then when she quests right away, the other card then can challenge my opponent, because Queen's +4 -4 is very strong. Yeah, so we figure out our game plan. What do you do? We got the early plan. You got your first few turns down. We got our curve down. Now let's look at your cards and say, what if I don't win early on? Like, what does the deck want to do as the game goes on? Do I have a mid-range plan? Do I have an end game plan? And again, this is something you have to think about. Like, once you get into Grab Your Swords, A Whole New World, Let It Go, Hades, Be Prepared, Ursula, Elsa, all these very strong cards that come in later game, what do you do if you get to that point in the game? Do you start to hold cards in your hand and keep those resources? Because if your opponent starts removing your field, you keep enough presence on field to control the matchup, but keep some in your hand. Or do you play cards like more rush cards? Do you play evasive cards? Do you play Tiana and go to try to shut down your opponent's action cards? Think about things like that too when you're going through your deck choices and building it out. Like, what is your longer plan if things aren't going according, or if that's what your deck wants to do? Make sure you kind of have the plan down. Then let's look over our deck at that point once you get there and see uninkables. Like I said, under 15, you know your low cost, you have your boss cards, you have your staples. Where is the deck lacking? Do you need more low cost cards, high cost cards? Do you need more draw cards? Are there draw cards available? Or do you need more like removal or damage or how to play through these things? Once you see what your deck is lacking, go through the card pool and figure out where you can add that in. Once you mix that in, look over your whole deck. Is there anything you'd want to change, or is there not? You can add the utility cards to finish it out, like Amethyst Ruby, how we mentioned, when you have all these high cost cards. Your Lady Tremaines and your Be Prepareds are pretty much staple, but your Ursulas and your Elsas are subject to change. So this utility portion is where you will talk about those cards and how many do I want to play of each of them. Once you kind of get all this together, then I would suggest hopping on pixelborn and do at least like 10 games. Do 10 games minimum. Don't make any changes at all. Only write down what you've noticed, where you misplay, cards you did wrong, what you could do better. Don't change anything until you do 10 games though, because it's very easy to play 2 or 3 games and one card just didn't line up in all of those, and you start to get frustrated and you're like, I need to take this card out, and you don't see the bigger picture of that card lost to Emerald 3 times. You're not going to play against Emerald every time. Play 10 game minimum before you make changes, and then make a couple changes. 10 more games, make a couple changes. Things like that. Once you're actually then ready, you can go ahead and invest into it. Or, I mean, if you're only playing locals in real life, then I guess you got to invest into it a little sooner. So, this is Tiana Aggro, one of Elphos's decks. So, you can go ahead and check him out on YouTube. So, definitely an aggressive deck. So, we have a higher 1 cost curve than typical. Like I said, there's the Queen, the Stitch, and our 1 cost 2 quester. So there's our 12. We are playing Cinderella. It does make sense here because you are being aggressive. We're playing Tiana, so we want to be able to dump our hand. And Steel has some pretty good removal songs, so the inclusion of Cinderella makes sense. If you were going to try to stick to 12, it'd probably be Stitch that comes out because your Queen package can sing, Cinderella can sing, Lilo is your aggressor, but Stitch Rockstar is also very strong in an aggressive matchup, so playing more into our 1 curve, and we see the entirety curve over here, so 16, and then we're at 14, so a little bit higher than I'd prefer on 2s. Like I said, your 3 cost is going to be that big range, and then we're going to slowly taper off, and that 5 to 7 range is not going to be that big. So for our 2s, we have characters. We only have 2 characters that we play, which that's part of it too. We say 10 or 8 to 12 and 10. So ideally like 20, right? So we got 24 characters here. There's going to be some other actions, obviously, because we see 14, but we only see 8 here. So there's 3 other actions or items. But that's like I said, the other thing. If all of your 2 cost cards are actions and items, and you only have like 4 characters, obviously there's 8 here, but say you only have 4 characters, right? That means you might want more 1 cost characters to help supplement that early strategy. When you're playing Steel, things like Benja are very good, especially to hit like a Fishbone Quill, a Sleepy's Flute, and things like that. Hercules, there we see he's a good strong shifter, and he is a bodyguard. So our 3 costs, we have 2, 4, 8, 9, 10, 14. Or no, those are 4s, so 8. 8 being just our bodyguards, and then we have the 6 there, our shifting cards, and then our big Cinderella. Again, we are playing 10 songs in this deck, which I said that it makes a lot of sense why you're playing the extra 1 being your Cinderella, because all these songs are singable by your Cinderella as well. It's not like you're playing the Grab Your Swords or the Whole New Worlds, because this is an aggro build, and Whole New World is just really bad in here because you want to be able to dump your whole hand to turn your Tiana on. Let's see if we can't check out another one and see RMB Green Fossa. Try and get to a different deck builder here. So this time we do see the 8 1 cost cards, kind of how we had mentioned. We see 8 2 costs, and then it's a total of 8. Here, however, 3s and 4s are both lower, and 5 cost is the big one. Like I said, there's exceptions to every rule. Typically, you'll see like 3 and 4 being higher, and 5 starts to drop down, and then 6 and on is much lower. But again, there are exceptions to every rule. With a high 5 cost curve, I'm pretty curious to see if Just in Time is in here, and I'm assuming it is, which kind of cheats out the 5s. So again, a lot of these 5s can kind of go into this 3 category, which fits what we were saying. We have 3 cost, that is, so 8 3 costs. Our 4 costers, Rapunzel is very strong. 5 costers of choice, we have our bodyguard in the Maximus, the Queen shifting, the Mufasa because he just gets out your big cards when he leaves, such as the Genie. I had an opponent do that to me 2 games in a row. It was just crazy. I'm like, I never hit anything off Mufasa. I'm the type who will Mufasa into a Friends of the Other Side when I'm only playing 4 non-characters in my 60 card deck. However, I got hit by Genie twice, just very strong in being able to get rid of a card. Then you have your Stitch Rockstar, your Ray, and your Pete. So actually no Just in Time. So that makes sense with the Mufasa, but I still kind of like, if you're playing that many 5 costs, the Mufasa is what kind of cheats them out. You have a higher chance of hitting your big cards, like here, by your Mufasa leaving. But at the same time, I think having like 4 Just in Times and 56 characters isn't a bad thing either. We'll go through one more and kind of see. So first place, 1K, January Play Network, Ruby, Amethyst, like we said. So like 7 1 costers. I'd prefer 8, but that one statistically matters. In play, it probably doesn't, because statistics and card play do not go hand in hand. I have found that out from years of playing. Our 2 costers, we have 7 once again. Obviously there are 3 more somewhere else. That's probably Teeth and Ambitions down in our actions. And then our 3 cost being much higher. 4 cost drops down, 5 6, and like I said, Ruby Amethyst being the one where your 7 8 is going to be higher than your 5 6, but you're going to go 1, creep up to 2, jump up for 3, come back down for 4, and then taper off with your others as far as the curve goes. So you have your Mim, your Maleficent, Merlin Crab being one of them utility cards you would come in and add later, Evasives with Minnie Mouse and your Fidget, your Merlin cards, and then we see again that Maui, your Lady Tremaine, your Ursula, your Elsa, and like I said, your Ursula, your Elsa, your Lady Tremaines, like these are all uninkable, as is Be Prepared. So 3 3 1 4, that's 11 uninkable high cost cards. You just really got to be careful with that when you're deck building. Hopefully the talking didn't bore you too much and you guys followed along decently well, but let me know down below what I might have missed. What do you go through when you deck build? This is kind of my process and how I do it and go through testing. And like I said, I got like 5 or 6 other deck ideas where, again, 2 commented replays, deck profile, discussion, going over, reviewing, and then 3 more replays uncommentated, sped up, so that you can just watch them and go about your business. Thanks for watching, and until next time, guys, take care.